Dr. Evelyn Carter was not having a good day. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the suburban streets as she drove home after another grueling shift at St. Mary's Hospital. Her mind was still filled with thoughts of her patients, children fighting illnesses that no one so young should ever have to endure. She had spent hours in surgery, her hands steady and precise, doing everything in her power to give them a chance at life. Now all she wanted was to get home, take off her scrubs and collapse onto her couch. The road ahead was quiet, almost serene, but that peace was shattered when flashing blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. At first, Evelyn felt confused. She glanced at her speedometer. She wasn't speeding. Her car was in perfect condition. She'd had it serviced just last week. Still, she pulled over smoothly, careful to follow every rule she knew about traffic stops. As she rolled down her window, she took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. Officer Mark Reynolds approached her car with an air of authority, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. He leaned down to peer into the vehicle, his eyes scanning the interior before settling on Evelyn. "License and registration," he said curtly, his tone clipped and impersonal. Evelyn nodded politely, reaching for her purse on the passenger seat. She made sure to move slowly, aware of how quickly such situations could escalate. Pulling out her license and registration, she handed them over with a small smile. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked gently. "I wasn't aware I did. Anything wrong?" Reynolds barely glanced at the documents. Instead, he squinted at her through the fading sunlight. "You were driving erratically back there," he said, though his voice carried more accusation than certainty. "And your taillight looks broken." Evelyn frowned slightly. "That can't be right," she replied evenly. "I had my car checked recently. There weren't any issues." She kept her tone measured, trying to diffuse whatever tension seemed to be building between them, but instead of calming him, her words only seemed to irritate the officer further. "You don't sound too sure about that," Reynolds shot back, his voice sharpening. "You need to answer clearly if you know what's going on with your own car." Evelyn blinked, taken aback by his sudden hostility. "I'm telling you, officer, I haven't noticed anything wrong with my car," she explained patiently. "If you'd like, we can check it together now." But Reynolds wasn't interested in solutions. His gaze lingered on her face, and something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, but Evelyn caught it. A flicker of suspicion, maybe even disdain. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered abruptly, stepping back and placing one hand firmly on his belt. Her heart skipped a beat. "Why?" she asked, her voice tinged with alarm. "What's going on?" "I said step out of the car," Reynolds barked, louder this time. His demeanor had changed completely, and Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a routine traffic stop anymore. It felt personal. Reluctantly, Evelyn unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car, keeping her movements deliberate and slow. She locked eyes with the officer, searching for some sign of reason or understanding. "Can you tell me what's happening?" she asked again, her voice firmer now. "I've cooperated fully. I don't understand why you're treating me like this." Reynolds ignored her question. Instead, he began reciting lines that sounded rehearsed, almost robotic. "You match the description of someone involved in a robbery earlier today," he said, though his delivery lacked conviction. "Until we confirm your identity, I need you to place your hands behind your back." Evelyn stared at him, disbelief washing over her. "A robbery? Are you serious?" she exclaimed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Look at me, I'm wearing scrubs. I've been working at the hospital all day. You can call them if you want. They'll verify everything." But Reynolds wasn't listening. He called for backup, his radio crackling with static as he relayed vague details about the situation. When another patrol car arrived moments later, Evelyn realized this wasn't going to end anytime soon. 2 more officers joined Reynolds, their expressions unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. They surrounded her, their presence overwhelming and intimidating. Before she could protest further, Reynolds reached for his handcuffs. "Turn around," he commanded, his voice cold and final. Evelyn hesitated, her mind racing. Was this really happening? How could this escalate so quickly? She turned reluctantly, feeling the cold metal snap tightly around her wrists. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, not from pain, but from sheer disbelief. As she was led to the back of the patrol car, Evelyn saw a group of neighbors gathering, nearby, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. One woman held up her phone, recording the interaction silently. Evelyn met her gaze briefly, hoping someone would speak up, say something to intervene. But no one did. The world seemed frozen in that moment, leaving her alone with the suffocating weight of injustice. Sitting in the cramped back seat of the patrol car, Evelyn tried to steady her breathing. She reminded herself that this was temporary, that cooler heads would prevail once they verified her identity. But deep down, a darker thought lingered. What if this wasn't just about mistaken identity? What if it was something else entirely? For years, she'd heard stories about racial profiling, about black men and women being targeted simply because of the color of their skin. She'd always hoped those stories belonged to someone else, to a distant reality she wouldn't have to confront. But here she was, living proof that it could happen to anyone, even someone like her, someone who dedicated her life to helping others. The drive to the police station was agonizingly long. Evelyn sat in silence, replaying the events in her mind, searching for answers that didn't exist. By the time they arrived, anger had begun to replace fear. Anger at the system, at the assumptions, at the blatant disregard for her humanity. And yet, beneath it all, there was also a glimmer of determination. If she got through this, she vowed, to use her experience to make a difference, to ensure that no one else had to endure what she was going through right now. Little did she know, her ordeal was only beginning. The police station was cold, sterile, and eerily silent. Evelyn sat on a hard wooden bench in the waiting area, her hands still cuffed behind her back. The metal dug into her skin with every slight movement, but the physical discomfort paled in comparison to the storm of emotions raging inside her. She felt anger, humiliation, and disbelief all at once. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. How could this have escalated so quickly? What had she done wrong? Around her, the station buzzed with activity. Officers moved briskly from one room to another, their boots echoing against the tiled floor. Some glanced in her direction, but most avoided eye contact altogether. To them, she was just another person sitting in handcuffs, another faceless suspect. No one seemed to care that she was a respected doctor, a pillar of the community, or that she had been pulled over for something as trivial as a broken taillight that didn't even exist. Evelyn tried to speak up multiple times, hoping someone would listen. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Carter," she said firmly to an officer passing by. "I work at St. Mary's Hospital. You can call them. They'll confirm who I am." But her words were met with indifference. The officer simply nodded without stopping, as if he hadn't heard her at all. It was clear they weren't interested in listening. They were more focused on processing her like any other arrestee. As the hours dragged on, exhaustion began to creep in. Evelyn hadn't eaten since lunch, and the stress of the situation left her feeling drained. Still, she refused to let herself break down completely. She reminded herself that this wasn't about her, it was about the bigger picture. If this could happen to her, a successful professional with no criminal record, what did it mean for others who didn't have the same privileges, for people without connections, resources, or public recognition? That thought kept her grounded, even as tears threatened to spill over. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, an officer approached her holding a clipboard. He rattled off a series of questions: name, date of birth, address, occupation. Evelyn answered each one clearly and calmly, making sure to emphasize her role as a pediatric surgeon. "Look," she said, her voice steady despite her frustration. "This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong. My car isn't broken, and I certainly haven't committed a crime. Can we please sort this out?" The officer shrugged nonchalantly. "We'll see," he muttered before walking away. Evelyn sighed heavily, leaning back against the wall. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block out the noise around her. When she opened them again, she noticed a young woman seated, across the room staring at her intently. The woman looked nervous, clutching her knees tightly to her chest. After a pause, she leaned forward slightly. "Are you Dr. Carter?" the woman whispered hesitantly. Evelyn blinked, surprised. "Yes," she replied softly. "Do I know you?" The woman shook her head. "No, but my son, he's one of your patients. You saved his life last year. We've been meaning to thank you properly." Her voice trailed off as she glanced nervously at the officers nearby. Evelyn gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I'm glad he's doing well," she said sincerely. Then lowering her voice, she added, "And I promise I'll do everything I can to fix this mess." The brief exchange gave Evelyn a sliver of hope. If someone here recognized her, maybe word would spread. Maybe someone would realize how absurd this whole situation was. But as the night wore on, it became increasingly clear that the system wasn't designed to move quickly or fairly for people like her. Meanwhile, outside the station, the world was beginning to react. Unbeknownst to Evelyn, a bystander who had witnessed part of her arrest had recorded the incident and uploaded the video online. Within minutes, it went viral. Social media erupted with outrage as viewers watched the footage of a calm, cooperative black woman being handcuffed and placed in a patrol car for reasons that seemed flimsy at best. Comments poured in, ranging from disbelief to fury. People demanded answers. Who was this woman? Why had she been treated this way? And why did it feel like yet another example of systemic racism? Back at the hospital, Evelyn's colleagues were also starting to piece things together. One of the nurses on her team saw the video late that evening while scrolling through her phone. Shocked, she immediately called the hospital administrator. Soon, the entire staff knew what had happened. Panic set in as they realized Evelyn was missing and likely in trouble. Without hesitation, they sprang into action, pooling their resources to find legal representation for her. By morning, news outlets had picked up the story. Headlines blared across local and national platforms. Renowned pediatric surgeon arrested during routine traffic stop. Reporters flocked to the police station, eager to get a statement. Cameras flashed outside the building, capturing images of officers coming and going. Inside, however, Evelyn remained unaware of the growing chaos. She spent the night in a holding cell, alone with her thoughts and fears. Sleep was impossible. The cell was cramped and uncomfortable, with only a thin mattress on a metal slab for bedding. Evelyn lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day in her mind. She thought about her patients, the children counting on her, to be there for their surgeries, their checkups, their recovery journeys. Would they wonder where she was? Would they understand why she hadn't shown up? The thought broke her heart. At some point, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into a restless sleep. When she woke up, the sun was streaming through the tiny window high above her head. A guard unlocked the door and told her she'd been granted bail but would need to appear in court later that day. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. As she stepped out of the cell, she caught sight of herself in a cracked mirror hanging on the wall. Her hair was disheveled, her scrubs wrinkled and stained. She barely recognized the person staring back at her. The courtroom was packed when Evelyn arrived. Friends, family, colleagues, and reporters filled the rows, their faces a mix of concern and indignation. Even though she appreciated the support, Evelyn couldn't help but feel exposed. This wasn't how she wanted to be seen, handcuffed, tired, and humiliated. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever came next. As the judge entered, and the proceedings began, Evelyn listened intently, her jaw tightening as the prosecutor outlined the charges against her. Resisting arrest, failure to comply with law enforcement, alleged unpaid tickets. Each accusation felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of how far removed the truth had become from reality. Her attorney stood up, ready to defend her. But Evelyn knew the damage had already been done. No matter the outcome, this experience would stay with her forever. Still, amidst the chaos, a spark of defiance ignited within her. She wouldn't let this define her. She wouldn't let fear or bitterness consume her. Instead, she vowed to turn, this nightmare into something meaningful, to fight not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. Little did she know, the hardest part of her journey was yet to come. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Evelyn sat at the defense table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wore the same scrubs she had been arrested in, now creased and stained from the night spent in a jail cell. Despite her exhaustion, she held herself upright, her posture unwavering. Her attorney, Mr. Thompson, stood beside her, shuffling through papers and preparing to present their case. The prosecutor, on the other hand, looked confident as he outlined the charges against her: resisting arrest, failure to comply with law, enforcement, and an alleged unpaid ticket that supposedly escalated into a warrant. As the prosecutor spoke, Evelyn felt a wave of frustration wash over her. Every word he said twisted the truth further, painting her as uncooperative and defiant when, in reality, she had done everything possible to de-escalate the situation. He referenced Officer Reynolds's report, which claimed she had been argumentative and evasive during the traffic stop. Evelyn clenched her jaw, biting back the urge to speak out. She knew better than to interrupt. This wasn't the time or place for emotional reactions. Still, it was infuriating to hear lies being presented. As facts, Mr. Thompson finally rose to address the court. His voice was calm but firm as he began dismantling the prosecution's narrative, piece by piece. First, he pointed out inconsistencies in the police report. Officer Reynolds stated that my client failed to answer his questions clearly, Mr. Thompson said, holding up a copy of the document. Yet, according to body camera footage, which we have requested and are still awaiting, Dr. Carter responded politely and cooperatively throughout the encounter. Next, he tackled the issue of the supposed unpaid ticket. After contacting local records offices, Mr. Thompson discovered that no such citation existed under Evelyn's name. This entire ordeal stems from a clerical error, or worse, a deliberate fabrication, he argued, his tone sharp with indignation. My client has never received any notice of this alleged violation, nor does she have a history of failing to pay fines. To arrest someone based on such flimsy evidence is not only unjust but reckless. The judge listened intently, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. Evelyn could see the skepticism growing on Judge Laura Thompson's face. For the first time since the nightmare began, she allowed herself a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, justice would prevail here today. But then something unexpected happened. As Mr. Thompson continued presenting his arguments, one of the officers seated near the back of the room leaned over to whisper urgently to another. Their conversation was hushed, but Evelyn noticed the sudden shift in their demeanor. They exchanged uneasy glances before rising quietly and approaching the judge's bench. One of them handed Judge Thompson a folded piece of paper, which she unfolded and scanned quickly. Evelyn watched the exchange with confusion. What was going on? Why were the officers suddenly acting so nervous? Then, as if sensing her gaze, one of them turned to look directly at her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something different about the way he looked at her now, as though he were seeing her for the first time. After a brief discussion between the judge and the officers, Judge Thompson called for a recess. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes, she announced, banging her gavel. The courtroom erupted into murmurs as everyone filed out except for Evelyn and her attorney. What do you think that was about? Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson shook his head. I'm not sure, but I have a feeling they've realized who you are, he replied, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Let's wait and see. When the session resumed, the atmosphere had changed entirely. The officers returned to their seats looking visibly uncomfortable. Judge Thompson cleared her throat and addressed the court. Before we proceed further, I'd like to clarify a few points, she began, her tone measured but firm. It seems there may have been an oversight regarding the identity of the defendant. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. An oversight? What did that mean? Judge Thompson continued. Upon reviewing additional information provided by law enforcement, it appears that Dr. Evelyn Carter, the individual currently facing these charges, is in fact the renowned pediatric surgeon whose work has saved countless lives. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as people processed the revelation. Officer Reynolds, who had been sitting stoically until now, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His face had gone pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead. It was clear he hadn't fully grasped who Evelyn was until moments ago. Now, confronted with the truth, he seemed overwhelmed by guilt, or perhaps fear of the consequences. As the judge dismissed all charges against Evelyn, citing insufficient evidence and procedural misconduct, the courtroom erupted into applause. Friends, family, and colleagues cheered loudly, celebrating the vindication of a woman who had been wrongfully accused. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, snapping photos and recording video as Evelyn stood up, her head held high despite everything she had endured. But the drama wasn't over yet. Before Evelyn could leave the courtroom, Officer Reynolds approached her hesitantly. Cameras flashed wildly as reporters jostled for position, eager to document whatever was about to happen. Reynolds stopped a few feet away from her, his shoulders slumped and his expression contrite. Without warning, he dropped to one knee in front of her, an act meant to symbolize humility and regret. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Carter," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't know who you were. I let my biases get the better of me and I failed you. Please forgive me." The room fell silent, save for the clicking of cameras. All eyes were on Evelyn, waiting to see how she would respond. For a moment, she simply stared at him, her emotions swirling beneath the surface. Part of her wanted to lash out to demand accountability for the pain and humiliation she had suffered, but another part of her understood that anger wouldn't solve anything. Instead, she took a deep breath and spoke softly, but firmly. "This isn't about me," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "What happened to me happens to thousands of others every day, people who don't have platforms or privilege to fight back. If you truly want to make amends, start by fixing the system that allowed this to happen in the first place." Her words hung in the air, powerful and unyielding. Some in the crowd nodded approvingly, while others whispered among themselves, debating whether Reynolds' apology was genuine or merely performative. Regardless of opinions, one thing was certain: Evelyn's response had reframed the narrative. This wasn't just about her. It was about systemic injustice and the urgent need for change. As Evelyn walked out of the courtroom surrounded by supporters, she felt a mix of relief and resolve. Relief that the nightmare was finally ending, and resolve to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she had gone through. Outside, reporters shouted questions at her, but she ignored them, focusing instead on the road ahead. She knew this moment wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The days following Evelyn's release from jail were a whirlwind of emotions, media attention, and soul-searching. Her story had exploded across headlines nationwide, sparking heated debates about racial profiling, systemic racism, and police accountability. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like Dr. Justice for Evelyn and Dr. Fix the System, amplifying the voices of those who saw her ordeal as yet another example of injustice faced by Black individuals in America. For Evelyn, however, the spotlight was both a blessing and a burden. At first, she tried to retreat into the comfort of routine. She returned to work at St. Mary's Hospital, where her patients greeted her with hugs and handmade cards. There, smiles reminded her why she became a doctor: to heal, to care, to make a difference. Yet, even amidst the warmth of her colleagues and patients, Evelyn couldn't shake the lingering weight of what had happened. Every time she looked down at her wrists, she could still feel the phantom pressure of handcuffs. The memory of being treated like a criminal haunted her dreams, leaving her restless and uneasy. Her phone rang constantly: interview requests, talk show invitations, offers to write books or give speeches. While some urged her to capitalize on her newfound fame, Evelyn resisted. "This isn't about me," she told anyone who asked. "It's about everyone who has ever been mistreated because of their race. If I use this moment selfishly, then I'm no better than the system that failed us." Instead, Evelyn channeled her energy into advocacy. She partnered with civil rights organizations and legal experts to push for meaningful reforms within law enforcement. One of her key initiatives focused on implementing mandatory racial sensitivity training for officers. "It's not enough to apologize after the fact," she said during a press conference. "We need proactive measures to prevent these situations from happening in the first place." She also advocated for policy changes, including the establishment of independent oversight boards to review cases of alleged misconduct. These boards would consist of community members, activists, and legal professionals tasked with holding law enforcement accountable. Evelyn argued passionately that transparency and trust could only be rebuilt if power was shared, not hoarded, by those sworn to protect and serve. Despite her efforts, criticism came from all sides. Some praised her as a hero, hailing her courage and grace under pressure. Others accused her of grandstanding or using her privilege to overshadow the struggles of less visible victims of police brutality. Even Officer Reynolds's public apology drew mixed reactions. To some, his gesture of kneeling symbolized genuine remorse, a step toward reconciliation. To others, it felt hollow, an attempt to save face without addressing the deeper issues at play. One evening, Evelyn sat alone in her living room, scrolling through social media posts about her case. Comments ranged from supportive messages thanking her for speaking out to harsh critiques questioning her motives. A particular thread caught her eye. Someone had posted a meme mocking her response to Reynolds's apology. It depicted her standing tall while he knelt with text overlay reading, "Too little, too late." Evelyn sighed deeply, closing the app. She knew criticism was inevitable, but it still stung. That night, she called her best friend Lisa, seeking solace. "I just don't know if I'm doing enough," Evelyn admitted, her voice heavy with doubt. "People expect me to fix everything, but how can one person change an entire system?" Lisa listened quietly before responding. "You're not supposed to do it alone," she said gently. "Your job is to start the conversation, to shine a light on the problem so others can join you. Change doesn't happen overnight, Evelyn, but if you keep showing up, keep fighting, you'll inspire people to take action." Those words stayed with Evelyn long after they hung up. They reminded her that progress wasn't linear. It was messy, imperfect, and often slow. Still, she refused to give up. Over the next few weeks, she traveled across the country, speaking at rallies, town halls, and conferences. She met families who had lost loved ones to police violence, listening intently as they shared their stories. Each encounter reinforced her resolve to continue pushing for reform, no matter how daunting the task seemed. One particularly impactful meeting took place in Chicago, where Evelyn joined forces with a grassroots organization called Justice Now. The group was led by a young activist named Marcus, whose brother had been fatally shot by police 2 years earlier. Together, they organized a march through downtown, drawing thousands of participants. As Evelyn stood before the crowd, microphone in hand, she felt a surge of hope. "This isn't just my fight, it's ours," she declared, her voice echoing through the streets. "Every time someone is profiled, harassed, or harmed because of the color of their skin, we all suffer. But together, we can demand better. We can build a world where no one has to fear the very people meant to protect them." The crowd erupted in cheers, chanting her name and raising signs bearing slogans like "Accountability Now" and "Black Lives Matter." For the first time in months, Evelyn allowed herself to smile genuinely. She realized that while her personal battle might never fully leave her, she had found purpose in turning pain into action. Back home, Evelyn continued balancing her roles as a surgeon and advocate. Her hospital administration supported her efforts, granting her flexible hours so she could attend meetings and events related to her cause. Colleagues pitched in, covering shifts and offering encouragement whenever she felt overwhelmed. Slowly, but surely, Evelyn began to rebuild her sense of self-worth, reminding herself daily that she deserved respect, not just as a professional, but as a human being. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. Late one night, as she sat at her kitchen table drafting a speech, Evelyn found herself staring blankly at the page. What more could she say? How many times could she recount her story before it lost its impact? Just as frustration threatened to consume her, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a teenager named Maya, who had seen Evelyn speak at a local high school event. "Dear Dr. Carter," the message read, "I want to thank you for sharing your story with us. Before hearing you talk, I didn't think anyone cared about kids like me, kids who look like you and me. You made me believe that I can make a difference too. Thank you for being brave." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes as she read the note. In that moment, she understood the ripple effect of her actions. It wasn't about perfection or solving every problem single-handedly. It was about planting seeds of hope and inspiring others to carry the torch. With renewed determination, she finished writing her speech, knowing that her journey was far from over. As dawn broke outside her window, Evelyn stepped onto her balcony, breathing in the crisp morning air. The city below was waking up, alive, with possibility. Somewhere out there, someone else was preparing to fight their own battle against injustice. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, Evelyn knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't stop until the system changed. For everyone. Months passed since the courtroom drama unfolded, and Evelyn's life had transformed in ways she never imagined. She was no longer just a pediatric surgeon. She had become a symbol of resilience and advocacy for marginalized communities. Her face appeared on magazine covers, her name trended on social media, and her speeches were shared widely across platforms. Yet despite the accolades and recognition, Evelyn remained grounded. She understood that fame wasn't the goal. It was simply a tool to amplify voices that often went unheard. Her advocacy work took center stage as she launched initiatives aimed at creating lasting change. One of her most ambitious projects was the establishment of a nonprofit organization called Equity in Action. The mission of the group was clear: to address systemic racism within institutions, particularly law enforcement and healthcare. Through Equity in Action, Evelyn organized workshops, training sessions, and community dialogues designed to foster understanding and accountability. One of the first major programs under Equity in Action was a nationwide campaign called Bias-Free Policing. Partnering with psychologists, sociologists, and former law enforcement officers, Evelyn developed a curriculum focused on implicit bias, de-escalation tactics, and cultural competency. Officers from various departments attended these workshops, where they engaged in role-playing scenarios and open discussions about how prejudice could manifest in their interactions with the public. While some officers embraced the program enthusiastically, others resisted, claiming it was unnecessary or politically motivated. But Evelyn pressed on, knowing that even small shifts in mindset could save lives. The campaign gained traction quickly, drawing attention from policymakers and activists alike. In cities where the training had been implemented, reports of excessive force and racial profiling began to decline. Community trust started to rebuild, albeit slowly. Evelyn traveled frequently to oversee the rollout of the program, often meeting with local leaders and residents to ensure its success. Each city presented unique challenges, but Evelyn approached them all with patience and determination. She knew change wouldn't come overnight, but every step forward mattered. Despite her growing influence, Evelyn refused to let herself become complacent. She continued working long hours at St. Mary's Hospital, performing surgeries and caring for her young patients. To her, this dual commitment to medicine and activism was non-negotiable. "I can't fight for justice if I'm not also fighting for my patients," she often said. Her colleagues admired her dedication, though many worried she was spreading herself too thin. Lisa, her best friend, frequently reminded her to take breaks and prioritize self-care. "You're human, Evelyn," Lisa would say. "You can't pour from an empty cup." But balancing two demanding roles wasn't easy. There were days when Evelyn felt stretched beyond her limits. After grueling hours in surgery, she'd rush to meetings or speaking engagements, her body aching and her mind racing. Sleep became a luxury rather than a necessity. Still, she found solace in the moments that reminded her why she kept going. The hugs from grateful parents, the letters from strangers inspired by her story, the sight of communities coming together to demand better. One such moment occurred during a town hall meeting in Atlanta. Hundreds of people packed into a community center, eager to hear Evelyn speak. As she stood at the podium, scanning the sea of faces, she noticed a familiar one. In the crowd, a woman holding a young boy's hand. It was the same mother whose son Evelyn had saved years earlier, the very same woman who had recognized her in the police station that fateful night. Their eyes met, and the woman gave her a warm smile before standing up to address the audience. "My son is alive today because of Dr. Carter," the woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. "And now she's saving us again, not just with her hands as a surgeon, but with her heart as a leader. We owe her so much, but more importantly, we owe each other the courage to keep fighting for what's right." The room erupted in applause, and Evelyn felt tears welling up in her eyes. This was why she did what she did, not for recognition or praise, but for the belief that collective action could create a brighter future. As her advocacy grew, so did calls for systemic reform at higher levels. Lawmakers invited Evelyn to testify before Congress, urging legislators to pass bills addressing police misconduct and racial inequality. Her testimony was powerful, blending personal anecdotes with data-driven arguments. She spoke candidly about her own experience, emphasizing that hers was not an isolated incident but part of a larger pattern affecting countless Black Americans. By the end of her speech, several lawmakers pledged their support for comprehensive reform measures. Yet even as victories mounted, Evelyn faced setbacks. Some critics dismissed her efforts as performative, accusing her of exploiting her privilege to gain sympathy. Others claimed she was being overly idealistic, arguing that real change was impossible given entrenched power structures. And then there were those who outright opposed her work, labeling her a threat to law enforcement morale. Trolls online attacked her relentlessly, spreading misinformation and hate. For every kind message she received, there seemed to be another, filled with vitriol. Through it all, Evelyn remained steadfast. She leaned on her support system, her family, friends, colleagues, and the growing network of allies she had built along the way. Together, they weathered the storms, celebrating wins and learning from losses. Evelyn often reminded herself of something Marcus, the activist she had worked with in Chicago, once told her. "Every movement has its critics. What matters is whether you're moving forward." By the end of the year, Evelyn's impact was undeniable. Equity in action had expanded to multiple states, reaching thousands of individuals. Police departments across the country adopted elements of her bias-free policing curriculum, and independent oversight boards began forming in several major cities. Meanwhile, her hospital launched a diversity initiative inspired by her vision, ensuring equitable treatment for patients regardless of race or background. Evelyn's legacy was taking shape, brick by brick. On New Year's Eve, Evelyn found herself reflecting on everything that had transpired over the past months. She sat, alone on her balcony wrapped in a blanket, watching fireworks light up the sky. The air was crisp, the world quiet except for the distant pops of celebration. Her phone buzzed occasionally with messages from loved ones wishing her a happy new year, but she muted it, savoring the rare moment of peace. As she gazed at the stars, Evelyn thought about how far she had come and how much farther she still had to go. She remembered the fear she felt sitting in that patrol car, the humiliation of being handcuffed, the anger boiling inside her during the trial. Those emotions hadn't disappeared entirely, but they no longer controlled her. Instead, they fueled her passion, reminding her of the stakes and the urgency of her mission. She also thought about Officer Reynolds, whose apology had sparked heated debates. Though his gesture had been controversial, Evelyn chose to see it as a starting point rather than an end point. It represented the possibility of redemption, for him, for others, and perhaps even for the flawed systems they sought to dismantle. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant acknowledging humanity while demanding better. When the clock struck midnight, signaling the start of a new year, Evelyn closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer. She prayed for strength to continue the fight, wisdom to navigate the challenges ahead, and hope for a world where stories like hers would no longer exist. Opening her eyes, she smiled faintly. The road was long, but she was ready. Evelyn returned to bed, her heart heavy with purpose yet light with optimism. Tomorrow would bring another day of work, another opportunity to make a difference. And as long as there were injustices to confront and lives to touch, she would rise to meet them, all without losing sight of who she was. A healer, a fighter, and a beacon of hope.